We wrapped up editing on the speaker screen, but now we're going to create the session editing screen. And it's going to enable some different scenarios, so it'll allow us to take a closer look at how we can handle cached lookups and dropdowns. And it will help us take a closer look at the performance of using partials and cached lookups. So let's take inventory on where we've been and where we're heading. We already laid out the navigation from our list screens all the way down to getting the full details for editing a speaker. We're going to do the same thing here for the session. And then in the previous module, we handled saving, canceling, and change detection of the speakers. Again, we'll do that for the sessions here. And then the new scenarios we're going to hit are going to be how these things differ for the sessions from the speakers, and how we can handle cache data using lookup lists, NG options for the drop-down lists, and enable full editing for the sessions. So in this module, we'll take some things that we've already learned, apply those to the sessions, and see how they differ as we get into some of the new scenarios. Hey, we haven't given any love to the session details. We've done everything with speakers so far. So it's time to do the same kind of thing, basically allow us to edit sessions. So let's go ahead and first create a session detail controller. First we'll go add new item, and then we'll come down to the controller template, and we'll add in here session detail. And then next, let's just do a quickie here. We'll actually copy speaker detail from the speaker folder over to the session. Now that's going to give us another view here. Now you gotta be careful anytime you do copy and paste, of course, but there's going to be some pretty similar things in this template. So we're going to start inside the session detail HTML, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the name of the controller from speaker detail to session detail. And then next, let's look at some of the contents in here and make sure they're going to be similar. This whole section right here are all the buttons. They're going to be the same whether you're editing a session or a speaker. Frankly, I could have used another template and inserted these, but for now, we're just going to copy and paste these over, and we'll leave that right where it is. Now, let's go down inside the widget. We'll keep the green widget. We'll just say green is our color of choice for doing editing. So right here, that'll stay the same. And we're still going to have a title, so we're going to keep that right here as well. That'll be in place. Now, all the contents and the labels inside here are going to be different, so that's the place we're going to start editing out of here. So let's go ahead and we'll just copy everything that's inside of this div and get rid of it. And this is where we're going to put in all of our session info, goes here. So the next step is to go ahead and put that session information into there. So let's get rid of that, and we'll stick a div in here, and this is going to represent the first field that we're going to allow to be edited. And we're going to go ahead and create a label, and that label is going to say title, and that's going to be the title of the session. And then we'll need an input so the person can actually edit it. And inside of that input, we're going to allow two-way data binding with ng model. And this time we're going to have VM session title. And then of course we'll be nice again, and we'll put a placeholder in place so we tell the person what goes here. And now let's just go ahead and copy this a few times, because we're going to have a track, and that'll be our first div. Now the rest of these will be slightly different. We're not just going to have plain old inputs for text, we're going to have some drop downs too. For example, this next one here is going to be the track. So that's going to be the session track. So is this in the JavaScript track or in the mobile or the cloud? And for this one, we actually have drop down lists, so we're going to need to use the select. And here we're going to use a different directive. We're going to use data ng options. And for this one, we're going to pass a couple pieces of information in. First, I kind of like to write these backwards. We're going to have to loop through all of the tracks. That's going to be the property in our controller. So we're going to say T in tracks. T will represent each track. And what are we going to do with that? Well, we actually want to go ahead and get and display the name. So we're going to say t.name for T in VM tracks. And that's the syntax that we use. So the name is going to represent the value of the track, like mobile or cloud. And then T is going to be the track itself. And then, of course, this is going to be the array of tracks. But wait, there's more. Not only do we want to get a list of those, we actually want to bind the value that the user selected. So again, we're going to need ng model, which we've used before here. And we're going to bind that to a property on the session called track. Now that's going to bind the entire track object. Now we'll have a couple drop-down boxes, not just the track. We're also going to have a room and a time slot. So we'll do some copy and paste. And again, you always want to be careful with that. So we'll put a time slot here, and we'll put a room right below it. And for the time slot, we'll change this to be time slots. And that's going to be for every TS, and it's going to be ts.name. We don't want to bind it to track. That could be bad. We'll bind that to time slot. And of course down here, we want to change this to room. We'll bind to the room. We'll loop through the rooms, and this will be for the R and r.name. And it's not roo, it's room. So now we've got our drop-down boxes ready to go. Next up, we've got the code, the level, and the tags. Now they're going to be back to our standard inputs. So let's go ahead and grab this div right here. And we'll copy that right below the room. We'll go bam, 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 3 of them. 3 bams are good. Next, we want to show the image of the person. Now we did that back inside of the speaker too. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that did. So speaker detail, we'll scroll down, and down towards the bottom, we've got this image right there. So we're going to grab that and reuse it, close that file, and now let's put that right underneath tags. So here we've got the directive that we're going to use to show the image, and then the property of that might change a little bit, right? So we don't have a VM.speaker, we have a VM.session.speaker. And this is a really cool part about Breeze. It'll automatically put together our object graphs. So it knows we've got this VM session and the speaker, and it already had the speaker information, so it's going to just tie those two together for us. So we can just use dot syntax and really make it easy. And then below it, we want to make the image changeable. So I'll get a little creative, and I'm going to put the full name right in here just to display what is that person's name. That's going to be vm.what.session.speaker.fullname. And then so we can change it, we'll put another selection box here. And remember before, we had to do 2 things for selections. One is the data ng options. That's going to be the list of things that they can change. We're going to say there's going to be an object in it called speaker full name, and that's going to be for every speaker in VM speakers. So we're assuming here that we're going to have something in our controller called vm.speakers. And then when it iterates through it, each one of those will be a speaker, and then I'm going to basically display the speaker full name. Now, once that list is there, we want to be able to bind to it. So we'll say data-ng model, and then we'll bind that right up to the VM session speaker. And then let's take all of those guys here, and I'm actually going to wrap everything from track all the way down to the last thing we did inside of a div. So let's do that real quick, just so we can keep them all indented in case we want to style them that way. So all of those will be hidden right there. And there we've got our title. So first we have the title, then we have all the details. And let's go ahead and grab one more input because we're going to need that too. We'll grab code, use a little bit of copy and paste magic again. And then below all of those, we'll put one more guy. And this guy is going to go inside of his own div, and he's going to be the description. So what description is that? That's the session description. And again, we'll put a placeholder in place and do the binding. So now let's flip over to the session detail, and we'll make sure that this guy is ready so we can actually load this up. So to get this guy going first, let's go ahead and delete some of the comments out, and we'll get rid of those down there. We want to make sure we call activate when it first loads up, because the important thing to do is to make sure the spinner goes away. And to do that, we'll use a line of code we've used before, which is common activate controller. We're not going to go get any data yet. That's where that would go right there. But instead, we're just going to call that to turn off the spinner. And of course, since we're using common, we want to inject that. We're not using scope, so we'll just replace it. And we have to put a big old to-do in here. We're going to have to wire up all of the bindings. So we'll do that in a moment, but first we just want to see if we can get the screen to load. So now, because we created this new JavaScript file, we have to go to the index.html, and we'll go ahead and drag in at the bottom the speaker details. So we'll put it right next to the sessions right here. Lots of stuff on this page, so let's take a look at that. He's right there. We'll save that. And of course, now we need a route, so we need to be able to actually get to that page. So with a route, there's 3 things we have to do. We have to put the route in place, and it's going to be very similar to what we did down here with the speaker ID. It's going to have a parameter. So we'll grab that. We'll come up here and paste that in, and then here we'll change that to session ID. The title is going to be session, so we'll be pointing at session, session detail HTML. So now we've got our route, and the other 2 things we have to do are to go back to the sessions HTML and the sessions controller. So the sessions HTML, we're going to have to put the code in place so that when somebody clicks on a particular session, it goes there. And we have similar code over in speakers HTML. Here we've got this ng click. That's what we need. So I'll pull that from the speakers over to sessions. And that goes right below the ng repeat. So here we have the ng repeat. At the end of that line, I'll just go down to the next. And here we're going to say go to session. And again, it's going to pass in S, so we're good there. The other thing we'll do is we'll put in a title right below. So we've got this go to speaker details inside the class for user. We'll go over to sessions. We'll put that in place right here. The only thing we added in this code is going to be the code right inside there, mostly this ng click for the go to session. So now we have to go into the sessions controller and wire that up. Now let's go create this function. If somebody selected a session, then we're going to go there. So we'll make sure we have a session object, and we'll make sure the session object has an ID, because the whole point of it is to pass the ID along. And then we'll use the location service. We'll set its path equal to the new route that we created, which is session. And of course, we have to pass along the ID. So we do that right there. We want to make sure that the location service is in here, and indeed it's not. So we'll add that up top, and then we'll add it right here so it gets injected in the proper position. And we should be able to run the application, and when it gets to the go-to session, it should automatically work. Now, we've got a bug in here. Where's the bug? Right there. See, we're not passing anything into go-to session, but back in the session's HTML, we actually expected to pass something in, right there. So we're passing it in, but this guy here is not listening. So let's see how good our error handling is at letting us know we made a mistake. So we'll go over to Sessions, and then we'll click on a session, and boom. Session is not defined. So the nice thing again about Toastr is it's going to show us these messages right here. And if we open the development tools, we could actually dig into that a little bit and find out, well, where was that? Now we happen to know, but maybe you didn't. So if you didn't know, we could scroll up a little bit, see where is the error occurring. It shows us right here that error is actually occurring right on Sessions.js line 56, position 17. Let's go check that out. And there it is. And all we have to do is put the parameter in place. So now we should be able to run. And again, we'll open the developer tools and refresh the cache. Make it a little bit so we can actually see the app and click on Sessions. We'll click on a session, and there we go. We've got an empty session. Why is it empty? Because we haven't gotten the data yet, but at least we can see we've got the HTML laid out, and there are no errors over here. The only error we've got is the mapping error again. So we clear that out, and we're good to go. The next step is to go get our session data. So now it's time to wire up all these bindings so we can get our data on the page. This is pretty much what we did in the other view, so let's go ahead and do this now. And here you can see all the different bindings we just put in place for all the same methods and properties that we're going to use for the sessions. We have a couple of new ones here, like the tracks and the time slots and the rooms. We'll get to those in a moment. They're going to be for the drop-down list for our combo boxes. And we'll also need some local variables for log error and for $Q. We use these same things over in the speaker detail. Because we want to track changes, we'll go down here and we'll put in the property for can save, which of course means we're going to need the cancel and the can save methods. Let's come down here below the activate and we'll put those in place. And we're going to let all these blue lines come in for now. Those are going to be places where it's reminding us that we have not yet injected that object. Next up, let's go ahead and put in the get requested session, which is similar to the get requested speaker over in speaker details. Again, we're going to pull in the parameter. We'll call off to a method, which we'll have to write. So we'll put it to do here. And that's going to be the data context session get by ID, which will be very similar to what we did with the speaker repository. So we'll come back to that and write that up. We want to make sure that we call this method too. So right up here inside the activate controller, let's make sure we call the get requested session as soon as we activate. And then when it's done, it'll turn off the spinner. And we are calling activate, as you can see right there. So now let's come down below the get requested session, and we've got a couple other we have to do. We have to make sure we get the title, because that's something we're binding to the title. We have a go back property too, so we want to bind that as well. Let's minimize some of these guys for now, just so we can see what's happening. And you'll notice we're just going down the list to make sure we have everything bound up. So we've got our go back, which is right there, and it gets bound down here. We want to make sure that when we get out of here and this controller gets destroyed, that we cancel. So we'll put the on destroy in place. And we also want to make sure our change tracking works. So we've got this has changes again we're going to listen to. And we'll use the same property names inside of this controller as we used in the other one. And then finally, inside of our save, let's make sure that we can save. And if we can't, we get out, we return a promise. And then if we can, we'll call the data context save. So if we flip back over to the speaker details, we should have a similar code at the bottom of that one. Down here, we made sure we could save the data, and we didn't put a little guard logic in there, which we should. So right here, the very first line, we said, if we can't save, then we'll go ahead and get out. So we'll do that in here as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So next up, notice we've got some methods that aren't being called, like onDestroy and hasChanges. Well, we want to wire those up inside the activate, so let's go do that now. So we'll call onDestroy, so we make sure that we wire that in, and then also the onHasChanges. So we wired all of these guys up. Now we have to make sure that we handle all of our injection. Now we got this one staring at us. Let's go take care of him. We need to make sure that we inject the data context. We also use the scope for listening to messages, the route parameter service for grabbing the route parameters, and then the $ window to make sure we can go back. So let's add those in and inject them. And then one last guy we had to use, which I believe we had the config, which is down here for the message. So we'll grab that and we'll inject him as well. Remember, if you don't grab these, it will tell you when you try to execute that code, but you certainly want to make sure you inject them. So this controller is pretty much ready to go, other than one big thing we have to do, which is make sure that when we call off to session get by ID, that we actually wire that up. So let's go into the repository for session. And inside of here, we need to create a method for get by ID. And we'll call a local function called get by ID. And remember, we have one of these in the abstract repository. So we're going to go ahead and say this dot underscore get by ID, and we have to pass in different features. The entity name is a property for this repository, session. We'll pass in the ID and the value for force remote. So you can see here that repository session was able to take advantage of the get by ID in the abstract repository, just like the one that was inside repository speaker. And we're just differentiating that by the name of the entity that we pass in. Now, if we want to, we could actually override the get by ID and just implement it differently inside of each repository. And we may just do that later on in the course. So now we've wired up the session detail mostly the same as we did for the speaker detail, but there's one thing left to do. So what is that? Well, we've got these tracks and time slots down here and the rooms. Let's leave those blank for now just to make sure that we've got everything else working, and then we're going to fill in those drop-downs. So if you run this, open up Developer Tools and refresh the cache. We'll go back to Sessions. Let's choose something different like this one down here for SPA Jumpstart with Durandal. And then here we can see all the data is loaded other than the drop-down boxes. Now let's try to enter something in here for the title. Let's change this to foo. And when I do that, notice it changed up here, and we got our change tracking right there. So the icon is in place. And the cancel button works just fine. So now, let's get these drop-downs working. Remember before with the speakers that we implemented a little bit of smarts in our app so that when we have a list of speakers, or in this case sessions, we only get partials, basically the summary information. And then when we click on one of these, we should go get the full-blown guy. Well, we didn't quite do that yet for sessions, so let's see why this doesn't work. Now if we come into here and we click on Scott Guthrie, watch the XHR traffic, notice there's no data coming across. It thinks it's getting it from cache. And it indeed has the keynote, and then the level and the tags. So we got the title and the picture, but there's no description. The description is one of those things that actually comes across with the full-blown object. So if I back out of here, just to prove we didn't click on somebody who was already cached, let's go down to Scott Hanselman down here. See, there's no more traffic down here still. So we don't have any traffic in here because it's actually grabbing everything from cache. We don't want it to do that. The first time it comes into a detail, we want it to go off and get the new record. So the way to fix that is over in the model. Remember, for the person, we set this is partial to false. We want to do the same thing for the session. So right here inside the constructor for the session, let's set is partial to false. So that means when we first get sessions, they're all going to think they're not partials, so we need to identify when they are. And inside the repository session, here's the getPartials method. And down here, when we get the data back, we're actually going to take those results right here, and we're going to pass them into self-set_partials_true. And we have that inside of our repository abstract, which will then return all the sessions for us. So let's go look at that just for a moment. Inside our repository abstract, down at the bottom, we've got our set is partial to true right here. So that'll set these guys up as being partials. So now when our logic comes in to go get somebody by ID, which we can see right back in the repository abstract, because we're calling that through here, it's a pass-through. So back in repository abstract again, let's go look for get by ID. So first, we're going to check the cache first, and then if it gets that data, one of the first things it's going to do that you might see right there is going to say, if that entity is a partial, then get out of there. So if it isn't a partial, we're going to go ahead and return it. Otherwise, we're going to go back to the server down here to get the full-blown object. So now, because we set that one property over in the model, we defined it here, and in repository session, we made sure that it was set up properly, inside of the get partials, which is down there. Now we run our app. We should be able to see the network traffic operating the way we wanted it to be. So first we'll open up the tools again. We'll refresh that. Clears out the cache. Go back to XHR. Clear all traffic briefly. We'll go over to sessions. We should see the HTML. Now we click on a session. We should go see it getting Scott Guthrie. First, there's the HTML for it, and right here, there it's getting the full-blown session. Big difference here should be there should be something in the description, if there was a description. In this case, it was change the world. Now, if we back up and we go back into Scott Guthrie, we should see no additional traffic. So first, clear out the traffic to make sure. Go into Scott Guthrie, no traffic. We'll go back, and we'll go into somebody different. We click on this one, and you can see the traffic comes back. So what the isPartial technique is doing for us is allowing to reduce the network bandwidth up front and then only go get larger objects as we need it. And then Breeze will cache the data for us every time we get new data. And this can really help performance. We're going to round out the editing screen by adding in the drop-down list. So we have values for all those different drop-downs. Now those values are going to come from the cached lookup values that we already have, because we have these guys already inside the data context. When we put these into place, we're going to make sure that when the user selects a value, those options are going to be bound back to the selected session. So if we select JavaScript here for the track, the JavaScript object will be bound right through to the session object in our controller. So we're going to use two different bindings that we set up in the view. One is ng options. That's going to be the list of things that we're binding to, this cached set of lookups. And then ng model is going to be the selected item that's bound back to the controller. So our next step is to go get the lookups so we can bind them to both of these directives. When we're editing a session, we want to make sure that we have drop-down values. Now we have this data cache, so let's go wire this up. We've got the bindings in place, but now we need to get those lookups. So let's write a function here called initialize lookups. And we're going to call this right from the activate. So inside of the session detail controller, we'll wire up the init lookups. And then in here, we want to fill in our rooms, tracks, and time slots. So we need to make sure we have those properties data bound. So up top, let's take a look. Here we have the time slots, the tracks, and then here we have the rooms. So we're good to go on empty arrays. Now we got to fill them up. So down below, inside of init lookups, do we have any place that we can get this data? And the answer is yes, we do. So first, let's go get them to a local variable. And we can call the data context because that's who's got all of our data. And remember, we've got that lookup repository. And inside of there, we have this lookup cached data property. Let's go look at that just so we know what it is. So over in the lookup repository, we scroll to the bottom and you can see down here we've got this lookup cached data that we set. And it's going off and getting all the local data for rooms, tracks, and time slots. Why local? Because remember, we prime that data up front when the app starts to run, and then we load it into this lookup cache data. And we just make it available to everybody. So now we can just say data context, go get the lookup repository, get that lookup cache data. And then we can just simply say, save the rooms, and we'll set that to lookups rooms. And that's not going to help us get the speakers though, so we have to go get those separately because they aren't in the lookups cache. Those, we're going to go to data context, and we've got our own speaker repository, and we'll look at the methods we have. We can say get what? Well, we want to get all the local guys, and then we're going to pass in a value of true here. So now we're getting all the local data, and we'll go check out what we've got in that repository for the speaker. And let's go find get all local, and here we can see there's get all local. It's going to go off and get all the people who happen to be speakers and return them back. So now we've got all of our lookups that we're caching right here, and then we're capturing those up into the variables up top. So we've got our speakers, time slots, and tracks, and we've got the rooms. And then back in the HTML, we were already data binding these with ng options. So now when we run it, we should see the drop-down list filled. And we'll open up the F12 tools and then refresh to clear out the cache. We'll go into the sessions. We'll pick a random session. Looks like a good one. And here we can see all the drop-down lists. And if I change Mads to Colleen, boom, the picture changes too because of data binding. Pretty cool. And we can change any of these session types up here, and notice the change detection is in place. We can cancel those, and then now the picture should revert back. Yeah, if you want to have fun with this, you could just go and select a bunch of different pictures like that. Anyway, now we have the lookup list loaded up, all because of the ng options, which is loading the list, and then ng model, which does the two-way data binding. And we just took advantage of our cache data for the lookups. And for a look under the covers, what's really cool about this, if we come down here and look at the XHR traffic, let's clear things out. Let's go ahead and go back to the main page on the dashboard. And here's all of our traffic. We'll clear it out there. We'll go over to sessions, and then we'll select an individual session. Now when we see this here, notice we're just getting the sessions at this point. We didn't have to go back and get all the rooms or tracks or time slots. So it's not like every time we go to a different session, we'll come out real quick, we'll go into a different one. Now we got that session, but notice we didn't get the time slots or the rooms in this case, because we already had them in cache. It's only getting the information about the session, such as a description that we didn't have before. We just completed editing of both the speakers and the sessions. So what did we learn here? We learned that we used what we learned already from editing the speakers to apply to editing the sessions, and a lot of that was very much the same. But there were some new scenarios we enabled too. For example, getting lookup lists and loading drop-down lists, so we can handle ng options using that directive to bind the data from our controller up to the screen. And we took advantage of caching the lookup information that we already did in the prime data method back in the data context. So then we could just ask the data context, hey, give me our lookup information. And it knows that it just has a handle on them already. So we could use those inside of our lookups for the view. Now that we've wrapped up saving, let's move on to inserting and deleting.